Shooby-doo artists, arters, and art appreciators, and welcome to the Seapony video. After making my Takara 1986 My Little Pony doll, I decided I wanted to 3D print her since I made the 3D print file, but I felt like it would be underwhelming if I just tried to print the same file in the last video, and I wanted to make it a little bit new and fresh. I decided I wanted to merge the Takara My Little Pony with a gimmick the original Hasbro line originated in 1983, the Seaponies. Obviously based off seahorses, they have little curled tails and fins and a horse head. I figured that the Seaponies would be the perfect opportunity to create my own variant on the Takara pony with a Takara-style head and like a posable seahorse tail. I'll admit I had actually come up with the Seapony idea far before deciding to print it, and I hadn't decided whether it would have joints or not. If I were to match the original Seaponies, this would be a single piece body, but obviously the original Takara My Little Pony has moving arms and legs, so I wanted something to replicate that. I started with a 5-part tail to allow a lot of posability and kept armholes, just like the 2-legged version. It's like roughly the same proportion in body, only this time the armholes fit little fins that can be moved and posed. Although they're the same size as the arms and could theoretically fit the arms too. The head is just about the same with fins on the cheeks for added detail. I made a few variant Seapony designs while creating the concept, including a mer pony a la Friendship is Magic. If you haven't seen that series, the mer ponies are more fish-like instead of seahorse-like, unlike in the original My Little Pony from the 1980s. That would also kind of match the front arms from the original design concept. I imagine this is more like a hippocampus or a horse with 2 front legs and a fish tail. Some people call the Generation 1 Seaponies hippocampi because they are technically horses combined with fish, which is a similar thing, but I think of the mer pony or hippocampi design as the one with arms or front legs, and Seaponies are different because they only have fins and they have the curled seahorse tail. In the Generation 1 animation, the Seaponies use their fins to gesture like hands, which I also think is really cute. So I wanted to incorporate that on the doll, so she would have some unique aspects to her. As well as the mer pony design, I made variants on the Seapony Takara design, such as a unicorn horn and longer fins to imitate like a Pegasus or flying fish. So with all these variants, which one am I printing? Good question. I wanted to go with a basic design of a pony, but then I remembered this one comment on my previous video. User @mimicryofnothing suggested a strawberry instead of a unicorn horn for a strawberry themed pony. Since my little channel mascot thing is a rabbit with a strawberry tail, I decided I wanted to try it and modeled a unique strawberry unicorn horn for this doll. The deep lore of my Strawberry Bunny character, by the way, is she's from a series of stickers I made years ago called the Berry-Eevees, which were berry-themed Eevee Pokemon. I made a whole bunch of them and I had them up on Redbubble a long time ago, and they were taken down for being Pokemon copyright, which is kind of the risk you take when making fan art. Although it's kind of annoying because exact Pokemon merch ripoffs are still over that site, but whatever. At least the Berry-Eevees were transformative, and I turned them into berry rabbits instead. It is what it is. I never made much money off Redbubble anyways, and it's now deleted, which is why I don't have any actual merch. Anyways, back to the Seapony. If you've been following my channel, you may already know that I don't own a 3D printer, so how am I getting it printed? The library. As mentioned in my previous video, the library near me has a 3D printer that I was able to use for this. I was worried that this would be super expensive because I'm pretty broke, so even moderately priced is kind of expensive for me, but it turned out to be like less than $10 to print the whole Seapony, and the people there were really nice and helpful. What did I learn? Well, I didn't know at the time how importing STL models into 3D printer programs worked. I didn't know how to send or arrange the components of the model. For example, because my piece is multiple pieces, I thought the program would read it as multiple pieces if I sent one file, but the pieces need to be sent separately, I guess, for them to be moved separately in the 3D printing program. I went back and forth with the 3D maker, aka like the person at the library who runs the 3D printing lab, and they were really helpful in explaining like the errors that happened with the file and like what I needed to do to fix them and how to resize everything and everything like that. I knew that after I made this model, I would probably end up editing the resulting file in Blender for future printing purposes, especially because I want to make this file available for sale, and so I want it to be like as neat as possible. While I go over the results of the print, I'm also going to show you my edits in Blender to hopefully make everything print a little neater in the future. I also downloaded the program Cura, which is used for 3D printers, so I could preview potential printing errors myself. It's completely free, so I didn't have to like own a 3D printer in order to download Cura, although you have to decide which sort of 3D printer model to use inside the program. So I ended up using like a standard, I think it's like Neptune Pro something. It's a 3D printer that I found on a list of like budget options. So I use it for testing, like this budget option for testing, because I figure that it seems to have reasonable quality, but not like the most high-end quality. So hopefully the estimates that the program kind of spits out will be accurate to a lot of like common 3D printers. Also, it's a PLA printer, so any previews are going to be like PLA based. I know resin printing sometimes has like different specifications. So number one, the head. I think the head turned out really good. The main thing that stands out is obviously the chin area. There's also a small hole in one of the ears because I made the interior wall too thin. The edits to the head are just to pull the chin down a bit and to make more of a slope and flatten the face fin down so it looks nicer when printed without supports. If printed with supports, I mean the original version should print fine also, and supports might be used in like the newer version as well. This just makes it a little cleaner in case anybody like prefers to not use supports. The original Takara Pony kind of needs supports anyways, so it's not that big of a change. And the inside of the head was adjusted to make the interior wall thicker so it won't have like those holes or anything. The nose looks good except for the back of it, because it was basically printed with the hole downwards, so it was printed at sort of a 90-degree angle from the print bed, which means that it ended up a little messy, but it doesn't really matter because that side won't be seen anyways, although in this version it doesn't quite fit with the head. I sized the nose pad down in future versions in order to adjust that. The body turned out pretty well. It was printed standing upright from the base and just needed a support for the fin at the back of it. It fits with the head as is, like really well, but I did decide to remodel the back fin a little bit to flow more into the back. In order to prevent it having the sharp 90-degree corner, I added that like 5th little fin bump at the bottom. Again, there was an issue with the walls of the body that made holes in the like fin sockets, but I adjusted that in Blender for like future printing, and for my version I just fixed it using epoxy clay. The fins look good except for the tips, because I think it was printed well at the end of its tips or something like that, or needing some sort of support. For future printing, I have simply made like a flat surface on the ball side of the fin to show where it should sort of be printed from. So it should be printed from the ball side standing up, even though that will make the ball not entirely smooth. In my opinion, it's better to have like a ball socket that's like not entirely perfect than it is to kind of mess up the fins, especially since the fins are so small that any flaws are going to be like super obvious. The tiny little eye pegs are a little rough, but I think that's just due to the medium of 3D printing, because the printer is just never going to be able to print something that small like completely neat 100% of the time. I did end up adjusting the eye pegs a little bit better so that they have a stem with more of a smooth curve, so they can be printed without like needing support or having an ugly back or anything like that, and I think they're a little bit thicker in the final version. The tail turned out pretty well, all things considered, but the tip is just too small to be used easily. I knew it was the riskiest piece to make small and expected some minor issues. I had originally been planning to put like a metal peg between the two parts of the very end of the tail, but it was just too small for that whatsoever. I decided to completely resculpt the tail both in my in-person 3D print version and in the 3D modeling program. I had 2 different ideas for how to completely fix the tail issues. Either I could combine the 2 end pieces into one end piece and resize everything up, or just size everything up altogether. So I just had my like Tumblr followers vote, and they voted for making the tail 4 pieces instead of 5. So I actually used epoxy to mold together a new tiny end for my 3D print, and then I mimicked that in Blender. So now the Blender version is just a 4-piece tail instead of a 5-piece tail. The most difficult part for the library to print was this coral stand, which I hadn't really considered the logistics of at the time. I just wanted to make a stand for the Seapony to sit in, and I thought the coral arms would enable me to pose her in unique ways. What I did not consider is that this needed many supports and was like not very optimized for 3D printing. The 3D maker had such a difficulty getting the supports off, and the piece looked so rough, he actually suggested I resculpt it. However, I'd been waiting for a while due to unexpected delays, and I wanted the Seapony, so I'd asked to see it and decide whether I could repair the damage. And when he sent it to me, there was basically very little damage other than some rough undersides and then a little hole at like one of the tips of the coral. So I took it and I just got some epoxy, which, by the way, the epoxy that I spent on this project was only like 10 grams, but the box of epoxy was like $30. So it was more expensive than this entire project. But I fixed up that hole and smoothed out some pieces both on the coral stand and on the rest of it. And I also resculpted the coral stand in Blender to look pretty different, but it should still hold different poses in the same way as the current stand does. I put a rather thick, probably too thick layer of gesso on all of the pieces, and then sanded them down to the 3D print. I did get it printed in pink, but obviously the primer is white. I needed the primer to help smooth it, but printing it in pink should help in case any of the pink paint chips or rubs off. I should probably talk about the design now also. I actually had a lot of trouble with the design. I couldn't decide whether I wanted to focus on a strawberry shortcake, or a chocolate covered strawberry, or just like a strawberry, like the plant. I made 4 designs that I put on Tumblr for my followers to vote on, and then based off their feedback, made 6 more designs. I really wanted to make the chocolate whipped cream cake idea work, but it just didn't look right. Maybe it was just a combination of too many factors, like My Little Pony, seahorse, strawberry, that's already a bit much on its own, and adding like chocolate or cake or whipped cream and everything like that it's just a lot of elements. People seem to agree with me that focusing on the strawberry itself, like with the green, the pink, and the white without the brown or the sweets, was a better option. I should mention, since I showed my sanded piece, I actually sanded this inside an old acrylic aquarium that I sealed with plastic tape and gloves taped to the plastic. Basically, it's like a DIY sanding dust box, and I could poke my vacuum inside once it was done and suck up the dust. I also wore a mask while testing it, and I kept my cat out of the room, although it seemed to work really well, which I'm glad about because, like, my snake lives in this room, and my cat comes in here, and obviously I don't want either them or myself breathing in dust, because even if I wear a mask while I'm, like, sanding, the dust is going to get everywhere if I don't have it contained in some sort of container. Please be careful while you're sanding, like, wear a mask, keep pets out, and just, like, make some sort of plan for how to, like, collect and clean up dust. I do think that, like, sanding box that I made seemed to work fairly well, but I'm not advising that you necessarily do that because I don't want to be responsible if you still get sick. There are, like, professional sanding boxes that you can find on Amazon and things like that. They're pretty much the same thing. They're acrylic containers with plastic coverings and gloves. I mixed a whole bunch of paint in the right shade and added little bits of red mixed separately for the tail gradient. I often get really excited about my dolls, so excited that it's hard to finish them because I'm worried about ruining them, so there are like a few days between painting the fins and the strawberry and finishing up the head, and like a few months between me finishing the Seapony and recording this audio. Anyways, I really got to get used to just powering through projects, especially when I'm excited about them and eager to share them. I'm just nervous about them. Painting the Seapony's eyelashes was really nerve-wracking. I made them too thick and dark basically right off the bat, and even though I'd already sealed it with matte spray, it was really hard to wipe off, and I was worried about damaging the paint. And after that, I made sure to paint with very watered down acrylics, and it took a couple of like tries, and I had some Q-tips with water nearby so I could wipe them off. I was able to use a spray sealant. This is just Liquitex matte acrylic sealant, I think, something like that, just like Liquitex brand, and it works really well. I know that like people doll customizer type things always use like Mr. Super Clear, and I don't know how it like compares to things like that, but it does make my projects extremely matte, and it does seem to seal them pretty well, because I did test whether or not the pastels would come off after I had sprayed them, and they didn't. So that's an A+ for me. I added a teeny extra bit of pastel to the eyes also, so it would have a gradient and some eye shines, and then I also sealed it with UV resin so that it would be like extra shiny and a little bit more domed. Oh, you'll also notice her eyes are a bit more bulbous. That's because I ended up adding epoxy to make them more domed, and I kind of added too much epoxy. I only mixed like 10 grams, and it actually went like a lot farther, and I had more epoxy left over, which is why I added some to like the nose, which like didn't necessarily need it, and I made some other things that I'll show you later. But that doesn't necessarily reflect how the final sculpt will be. I made the eyes smaller than that in the final sculpt, like in the final 3D printed file. The Seapony stand was really rough, as I mentioned earlier, but I would have sanded it down, but I ended up doing like a spur of the moment texture using dotting tools and gesso. The gesso made like lots of nice smooth circles all over the surface, and I painted it in transition colors to try and mimic kind of how I've seen coral look, with the bottom being like a darker color and the top, where the freshest and newest baby corals are, is like lighter in color, if that makes sense. The additional dots in paint had sort of a different texture than the first dots, probably because they're like a different type of paint. The first dots were made with gesso, and then the colored dots were made with like just normal acrylic paint. Kind of prefer the texture before adding the additional dots on top of the gradient, but it is what it is. I still think the stand is pretty cute and holds up the Seapony pretty nicely. Next, project preview section. I have a couple different projects planned for future videos. Obviously, I'm still working on my own ball-jointed anther doll concept, but in the meantime, I also decided to try printing a doll based off a certain YouTuber's free-to-download anther doll project from a couple of years ago. I won't spoil that too hard, but I am excited. I am doing some editing of it. And yeah, it's a YouTuber that I've been a fan of for a long time, so I'm excited about that part. My next video might be something a little bit more low-key, like a face-up or customizing of an existing doll. It will take a while for any 3D prints to come from the library, and I have several dolls who need makeovers, such as a Na 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 doll, a few My Little Ponies, and a doll that I found in the trash outside of my apartment. Leave in the comments, I guess, which one you'd be most interested in seeing a video on. I'll put some photos on screen of my ugliest dolls, I guess. And you can tell me whether or not you want like a human face-up, a pony, etc. And then lastly, I'll drop a link to my Ko-fi in the description. I don't have a lot of sources of income right now. And like I said, I need money to do art projects. So if you want to donate, feel free, etc. Yep. Anyways, back to the video. I visited my mom while I was working on this pony, and I ended up taking home a ball of white yarn to use as the Seapony's hair from her giant trunk of yarn with every single color under the sun. I unwound the strands of yarn, brushed them out with a pet hairbrush, and then ironed them pretty flat before gluing them on. But I didn't want to just glue the hair onto her head, so I made this sort of wig cap. Obviously much different than a typical round cap because she's a pony, and I wanted to have, you know, a mane down her back. The wig cap is made of ribbon and glue, and I just glued the strands of hair onto that. I was hoping, since it's textured, the ribbon/fabric cap will hold the hair a bit better with like the glue than if I had glued it straight to like a smooth painted surface. Plus, if it falls off or any of the pieces fall off, I don't want to cause damage to the like paint underneath. I also ended up tucking another clump of wefts into the hair tie for the ponytail to fill out. I made quite a few drafts for the clothes. I really wanted them to look good and, importantly, form-fitting, which is somewhat difficult for this body shape. So I used tissue to start tracing out the pattern multiple times. I made this pattern with tissue, made a test dress using colors of fabric I wasn't planning on using, and then made a draft in the colors of my final design. I decided to use glue in the final design instead of sewing it because it just seemed like too small and unwieldy. What I'm showing you is my 4th try at this pattern, as well as the 5th outfit attempt. This pattern has 6 parts: shirt, collar, 2 sleeves, skirt, belt, and skirt fabric. I mean, it's a dress, but it's made up of a shirt and a skirt. I take my paper pattern and I trace it onto the fabric. To prevent fraying, I paint glue over where the edges will be, although not all over the entire thing because I find that makes it pretty stiff. When the glue dries, I cut the pieces out along the edges, a little bit outside the lines, but mostly sticking to the lines. I just kind of eyeball it. Since I'm gluing them together, I don't need that much space, but if you were sewing something like this together, obviously you would leave more of a margin. On the red dress, I cut along the edge and left it unfinished in the collar and sleeves, but for the green one, I cut a little farther out and folded it over to create a sort of finished edge with a hem. But really either is fine for this scale of doll. If you use a thick piece of fabric, it might not fold over cleanly and look like a nice hem. In order to make the sleeve holes, I didn't want to just cut the circle, so I cut many tiny slices like a pizza, shared among way too many people, and then folded them over on the back side of the shirt, or the inside of the shirt. I cut a few small slices into the bottom of the sleeves and basically just forced the cuff into a half arc over the top so the sleeve cuff will stand out. I folded the excess sleeve fabric back into the sleeve hole. The skirt has a belt that is a simple folded over piece of fabric to make the front look neat. I manually folded the pleats for both the green and the red skirts and used a binder clip to hold it while it dries. The trickiest part is getting the two perfect pleats for the shirt to fit properly. Because of the shape of the doll, I knew I'd have to create some sort of pleat or like a dart in the shirt, and the first draft actually had like a deeper dart, but since I'm making the top and skirt one piece, I basically decided to put the shirt on and wrap the belt around the waist to figure out where to glue the pleats exactly, and this prevents me from needing to like figure out pleats that much. I can just kind of tuck them in and then glue them in place. I actually ended up mostly covering the pleats with the little overall dress straps in the green dress. I just made a little arch of fabric and folded over the edge and then glued those straps in place. I didn't have any decorative flowers for the red dress like in the original design, so instead I just left that one as a skirt with a little bow. So the Seapony is like slightly different outfit variants, which I think is cute. And I also used acrylic paint to paint the white flower in the green dress and a pattern around the bottom of the red dress. I think if this doll were a bit bigger, it could be embroidery, which would be ideal, or maybe I could do like teeny embroidery in just like normal sewing thread, but paint looks fine, and it's such a teeny dress that it's hard to work on those kind of details anyways. You might be wondering where the tiny strawberry buckles on the green dress came from, and I actually made them really early on in this project, along with these slightly larger strawberry halves. See, I needed to use epoxy to seal the holes in the print as cleanly as possible, but I never used epoxy before, so I ended up mixing a little bit of test epoxy to make sure I could get it to work before putting it all over my project. I was worried about it like not setting or something. I've seen a lot of people use epoxy in a lot of videos, but I never see people weigh it. It just says that you need to mix equal amounts, but I'm paranoid, so I did weigh it to have very exact amounts, which is why I know that I used like 10 grams of epoxy, 5 grams of each part, and then I mixed them together, and I did wear gloves. Thank you very much. I wore gloves because I care about skin safety. As well as the teeny strawberry buttons, I painted these slightly larger strawberries in bright matching colors, and you probably saw them in the background of the earlier footage. Finally, near the end of this project, I'm able to put them together to use, and what I did is I used the same color fabric as the red skirt, and I glued fabric between the two halves. The inner part has like some smaller protruding ends, and a small loop of wire was glued in between them, and a ribbon of that same fabric can go through the loops in order to make a little bag. One side of the bag strap is velcroed together because getting it on and off the pony would be sort of annoying without doing that, like it just fits a little bit tightly. Shoo-be-doo, shoo-shoo-be-doo, call up on the sea ponies when you're in distress. Shoo-be-doo everyone, and here's the Seapony reveal. She's so cute. I love her a lot. I just love how like mobile she is. I just love dolls that you can like pose in a lot of different ways. Posing her little fins and spinning them around is so cute. And she turned out just like my concept art, I think, like, or at least as best as I could do. I think for sure better than I thought I could do. She looks, I guess, very professional to me. I don't know if you guys will agree. I think the only problem that I have with her is that her tail is just like too little to see underneath her dress. So I'm actually glad that I had to size up her tail in the final file. Like I said, I edited the file based on this model, and I need to get the new file test printed. So the file isn't available yet, but it will be available for sale next week. I will post on my community tab that the file is for sale for everyone, and I'll include like the unicorn horn and the separate set of fins which look like wings. Right now it's just PLA printed, but I would only print it in resin if you are experienced enough to know how to edit files to print in resin, so I can't guarantee that. But yeah, I'm super happy with how she turned out, and I don't know, I hope that like other people like her and make her. I do really like the Seaponies from the first generation, and I'd like having a version where like they have fins that are more protruding. I like that shape. I think it's very cute. I love having a doll that has like multiple little dresses, so it gives her like a slightly different vibe. And she even has her little bag and her little bag could like fit, like I just imagine it having a tiny book in it or something like that. And that would be so cute. But yeah, I hope you like this little Seapony as much as I do. Again, if you're interested in the file, I'll have that available sometime next week. And thank you for all the support on like the Takara based video. Okay, bye YouTube. Bye.